Thank you so much. I am excited to be here today to talk about some of the practices that I've had the pleasure and privilege of implementing, but also to learn a lot more about West Virginia's efforts as it relates to improving literacy outcomes for West Virginia students. So first, I want to give a little context about why we are looking to think more critically about how we are improving literacy outcomes for our students. I'm always inspired by Governor Bush, and today was no different. Governor Bush has issued advice for ed reformers. Those of us who are looking to, in our roles as policymakers or state leaders, community members, all stakeholders, that are looking to ensure that we go big and go bold, especially in light of this pandemic. So as part of the CARES Act, the U.S. Department of Ed has made available almost $3 billion in GEAR funds. And so Governor Bush has then challenged other governors to, again, go bold. So for today's presentation, Monica and I are going to just talk a little bit about the goal of attacking the soon-to-be widening achievement gap. And we're going to focus on early literacy as a means to do that. So we tend to think about our own space, our own school, our own district, or just our own state. But the truth is, across the country, in 2019, only 35% of our fourth grade students and 34% of our eighth grade students in the United States performed at or above NAEP proficient in reading. This shows us that regardless of how we're doing in our own spaces, in our own districts or states, there's so much work that still needs to be done across the country. So reading is an education and economic issue. I know that we do have some of our business leaders who are joining us today. So let's talk a little bit about why reading is just so important and why third grade is this critical year. Governor Bush mentioned earlier about from kindergarten through third grade, our students are learning to read. And then of course, from fourth grade on, our students are reading to learn. So if you look at the statistic again, 35% of our fourth graders across the nation read proficiently. This means that 1 in 3 students are in a position when they enter fourth grade to begin to read, to gain knowledge about a particular concept or subject or skill. Only 1 out of 3 of our students are able to do that. These other statistics, you may have seen them before, but I want to re-emphasize that only 88% of our students who failed to earn a diploma were struggling readers, and it could be traced to how they performed in third grade. The other statistics, especially thinking about our African American and Hispanic students who aren't reading proficiently in third grade, are 6 times more likely to drop out or fail to graduate from high school. And if you are minority and low income, and you're not reading proficiently by third grade, then you're 8 times more likely to drop out or fail to graduate from high school. So how does this impact the economy? Students who drop out in high school aren't eligible for 90% of the jobs. Their yearly earning is more than 50% less than that of someone who earns a bachelor's degree, and they make up nearly 50% of all heads of households that are on welfare. So I want to take this time to talk just a little bit about the current landscape of K-3 reading policies across the country, and how, again, this conversation is so timely that we are in this together as we all seek to find ways to improve literacy outcomes, but then also improve the quality of life for our students. Currently, there are about 37 states that have K-3 reading policies in some form, and 13 of those states have comprehensive policies. And I'll speak to the fundamental principles in a few minutes and what that means to have a comprehensive policy. So we've talked about the reading wars for so long. So you're probably wondering, okay, why is this subject up again? Why has this come back around? And so some of the most recent forces behind now this renewed sense of focusing on the early grades and ensuring that students are ready to read by the time they enter fourth grade, actually, I think began with APM Reports reporter Emily Hanford, who released Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? A couple of years ago, I believe in around 2018. And it sparked a national conversation about us having the knowledge with the science of reading, but there are instances in which this knowledge that we have, and it's ironic because this is the 20th year of the release of the National Reading Panel Report, where it was laid out in plain language. These are the components of reading. These are the things that you need to do in order to teach all kids how to read. So those recent forces, it relates to the podcasts, the reports that were released, also strengthening reading instruction data bursts with the National Council for Teacher Quality. They looked at how or if our pre-service teachers are learning what they need to learn and what mechanisms are in place to ensure that when they leave their teacher preparation program, that they are ready on day one to teach all students how to read. So these were some of the forces behind getting the conversation started. And last but definitely not least is Decoding Dyslexia, which is a network of parents. It is a grassroots movement across the country where Decoding Dyslexia chapters have popped up all across the country. And they want to make sure that all students, especially their children or students with dyslexia, have access to educational interventions that they need and accommodations that they need in order to be successful. So we want to make sure that we're including students with dyslexia or dyslexia characteristics in our efforts to improve literacy outcomes for all of our students. Okay, so now I'll just talk a little bit about these reading fundamental principles that I mentioned earlier that are included in many of the comprehensive policies. As Governor Bush mentioned earlier, he talked about Florida's successes and how Florida passed their policy in the early 2000s. Mississippi's Literacy-Based Promotion Act is fashioned after Florida's literacy policy. So these are some of the fundamental principles that are included as we look to improve the way we're doing education and the way that we are preparing our students for the world and to be ready to read by the time they enter fourth grade. Instructional materials, ensuring that the materials that our teachers are using are grounded in scientifically based reading research, supports for teachers in the way of professional development, in the way of literacy coaches, and then also in the way of funding and reprioritizing our local funds to support early literacy efforts. And those funds can go to professional development and also can go to making sure that literacy coaches are placed in classrooms to coach teachers along the way. Assessment and parental notification. Let's talk a little bit about accountability, okay? Making sure that our students are screened and identified early, and we're monitoring their progress along the way so that we'll know which interventions to provide, but also engaging the parents early and often. There have been too many cases where parents aren't aware that their children aren't doing well until the end of the school year. And we have to make sure that we ensure that our parents are partners with teachers and with the school in ensuring that their child receives a quality education. Instruction and intervention, making sure again that we are documenting those supports and services that we are providing for students. And if interventions that we've chosen don't work, then we need to make sure that we choose another intervention that might work. And progress monitoring is what tells us if these things are working or not. But again, also making sure that our parents are receiving supports, read at home plans, vetted lists of websites. Now that we're in COVID mode, okay? So vetted lists of websites. There have been so many links shared across social media. Some are good and some are not, you know, so we need to make sure that we're advocating and being partners with parents as well by making sure that they're aware of which resources are actually evidence-based and great tools to use at home. And lastly, which is controversial, Mississippi had the retention piece. We have the retention piece in our law. So those students who are severely below grade level will receive more intensive interventions, highly qualified teacher, more time with reading instruction, and they are retained in 3rd grade. And with a focus on ensuring that there are more opportunities for them to receive the supports that they need. Okay, so I've talked a lot about nationally and also some of the things that we've done in Mississippi. Monica, what is West Virginia's perspective on a comprehensive approach to improving literacy outcomes for students in your state?
Thank you, Dr. Burke, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here today. I'd like to take just a few minutes to share the story about early literacy here in West Virginia. And in order to do that, I really need to back up before we have state code, we have state board policy about early literacy, but even before all that, I'd like to tell you about how a catalyst to all this in our birth through grade 5 system, really for early and elementary education, focuses on looking at the successes of our universal pre-K program. We have a universal pre-K program that was built almost 2 decades ago and has received national accolades. Within that approach, we learned a lot about embracing the whole child and looking at all areas of development, much like Governor Bush had to say. So within that, we know that around 2013, many states were working on developing their early literacy systems, and there was a piece of code that looked at what was called critical skills at the time. And if you could go back a slide, that would be helpful. Okay, thank you. A piece of code that focused on 3rd grade and 8th grade and interventions for children at that point. We knew that that was far too late to start and far too late to look at the intervention process. So we worked and had a bipartisan supported legislature to enact legislation, West Virginia Code, to support a transformative system of support for early literacy for all learners, birth through grade 3 in this case. So with that, we then had a state board policy that was enacted and really focuses on some different components that are for the whole child. And when I say the whole child, I mean their academic development, their social development, their mental health development, their physical development. Certainly all those areas are important when you think about young learners. So you can see the code, the policy is there. We have 4 major areas of focus. School readiness, of course, is there. We have a whole school readiness framework. It's called Ready, Set, Go, West Virginia. We also have worked extensively with West Virginia, or with the Dolly Parton Imagination Library Program, to get books in the hands of children. We know from research that having literacy in the home is critically important. The Dolly Parton's Imagination Library Program provides over 1 million books globally to children each month. And we have a certain population within our state that if you're 0 to 5, you get a book each month. And we're hoping to go statewide with that, certainly. We know that the role of the teacher is critically important as well. So we have some different things in place that I'll talk about here just a little bit, but then I want to go in depth in a few minutes about some of the high quality classroom instructional based things we're doing. We have things like coaching academies, so there are opportunities for coaches within the county systems to deepen their professional learning about how to coach teachers effectively in those early and elementary grades. Local level professional learning, technical assistance based on the science of reading, and really just those research-based best practices. So teachers are getting the standards-focused support that they need to effectively work with the children that they serve. Also, we focus on early learning attendance. We know there's a strong linkage between how often a child comes to school regularly. Again, this is pre-COVID that we're looking at this, but early learning attendance is critically important to establishing those dispositions later on. And we know it's a bit different this year, of course, due to the pandemic. Local level attendance efforts, also working closely with attendance works on that. And then another component of this is the extended day and extended year partnerships that are in place with organizations, many organizations throughout the state, the West Virginia After School Network, locally determined partnerships. And a huge factor within all this is family engagement and encouraging families to take an active role and honoring them as their child's first teacher in the life of the education of their young child. So just to reiterate about the code that was written, the law, it really focuses on local level decision making and local level efforts that allow each of our 55 districts the opportunity to have an early literacy team. And within that team, they decide what's most needed to meet the children's needs in those communities, to support educators in those efforts, really. Again, that flexibility is incredibly important. I go on to the next slide then, of course, and there are a lot of different initiatives as part of our comprehensive system. Dr. Burke mentioned many different components on the previous slide. We have the instructional materials that are based in the scientifically based research. We actually have a really unique partnership with one of our institutions of higher education at Marshall University with the June Harvest Center. We have 5 early literacy specialists who serve as extensions of the state education agency, and they work very closely with the districts as well to provide that personalized professional learning and technical assistance that counties might need. We also, I mentioned coaching academies. We have an intervention framework that we're working with, our tiered system of support. We also have a plan, and so, you know, looking at what Mississippi has done, we were very interested in some of the work that they've done, and we looked at how they utilize their coaches. And so we know that they employ, Dr. Burke, I believe around 80 coaches throughout the state. Well, we do have a line item from the state budget. The majority of that goes to the local level, but we have some funding that we will be moving forward for the 21-22 school year to employ a number of coaches throughout the state. Counties who really want to have that coaching relationship, that partnership with support from the June Harvest Center, will have the opportunity to apply for the services of a coach, basically. We have that in place as well. Another thing that we're doing is looking at a progress monitoring screener. It's available for free to all districts who choose to use it. It's called the Phonological Awareness and Language Screener, or PALS. Again, another thing that I can't mention enough is family engagement and the role of the family in this home to school connection, particularly now during the time of COVID. Also, looking at summer reading camps. And this is West Virginia's version of how we address looking at promotion. It's a local level decision in West Virginia based on the way the code is written, that a county may choose for a child to have to go to a summer reading camp as a condition of to be promoted basically onto the next grade level. So that's something that we felt was important and needed to be made at the local level versus the state level. The segment that you saw from Pineville Elementary, we're really excited about that Blue Ribbon Book Club distribution. We knew with the pandemic, we wanted to get books into the hands of children who may not have access to many books. So we looked at the rising first and second graders throughout the state and provided each of them with a small library of books. About 197,000 books went out this summer. We also have each first and second grade teacher in the state receiving those books so that they can have access to resources and different activities they might do to utilize in their classrooms with the children to give them some sense of normalcy and connection to home. So the websites are there. We also have, the last thing I'll mention is our podcast series. We're really proud of that as well. And moving forward with that, we're in our first year. We have about 21 episodes now that focus on all different areas of early literacy. So while I'm a firm believer that we always have room to grow. I know that. We always can improve our craft. It's important to know that West Virginia's, we've had several governors, we've had a strong legislature over many years who've continued to support the early literacy efforts here in West Virginia, strong local level partnerships, strong county early literacy teams, and then of course, our educators who are working with these children on a regular basis, supporting children and families. So that's really, in a nutshell, what we've been working on with early literacy in our comprehensive system in West Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very exciting. It's very exciting to hear. I know that it takes a lot of stakeholders coming together with the same vision in order to make things work. And I'm glad to see that you all are in the process of doing that already in West Virginia and have plans to ensure that this work continues. As Governor Bush said, reform is never final. And so I really like that quote. And so we're in this work, and we know that we're in this work for the long haul. So I want to just shift a little bit about early literacy and the new normal. Now with, in the spring when all of the states shut down, that was one thing. But now we have across the country where we have students who are going back to school traditionally in brick and mortar places. And then we also have students who are online, who are learning online, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously. And then we have other students in certain areas that do not have access to broadband. They have packets. They have just really homework packets, And so we talk a lot about equity, especially in all of these different cases. So I just want to share just a few strategies that I believe are good strategies for states, especially for districts, as they are looking to combat the early literacy loss that we know that our teachers are seeing right now in their classrooms. So the first step would really be to focus on early identification. It's going to be critical to find out where students are, where they are when they enter your classroom, when you begin class. This is the prime time, especially within the first 30 days of school, but as early as you can get to focus on identification by administering a screener to students to determine which students are most at risk. After that, diagnostic assessments, they really tell teachers where to start with providing interventions. But with that, I think sometimes we just automatically assume that teachers know what to do. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the partnership with our teacher prep programs being so critical. But we have to make sure that teachers have professional development, that they have to have the training, and they have to be equipped in order to address student needs. Next, instructional coaches. I can't say enough about how amazing our coaches were and how they are, but I'm no longer in the position, so I say were, and how they supported teachers along the way. And they really served as thought partners, and they modeled lessons and gave feedback and all of those things. And that job embedded coaching was really helpful in building teachers' confidence, and of course, helping them grow their knowledge in their practice. And also for school schedules, allow school schedules to have enrichment time or time for intervention before, during, or after classes. I have a daughter who's 9th grade. She's a freshman in high school this year, but her district is completely virtual for this first semester. But in their schedule, they have time included for intervention for students to work directly with teachers online, or also for enrichment opportunities where they're using certain online programs that students can work in to to advance and so they can continue to have that type of work and support. And then lastly, outreach to parents. Like you, Monica, I just believe that the family engagement is key, and it really assists in supporting students, and it really connects to how well our students are going to progress. And so outreach to parents to just promote the importance of staying engaged during this time. And I know it's difficult with everything that's going on, but and the importance of attendance, whether it's seat time, actual seat time, or showing up for classes online. So what are you seeing, or what are some of your thoughts for states or for schools in ways that they can address COVID?
Sure, thank you, Dr. Burke. With COVID, we know in West Virginia, pre-COVID even, many of our children were experiencing tremendous levels of trauma. West Virginia led the nation in opioid deaths, unfortunately. I mean, we just had families completely decimated by the opioid epidemic. And so we had children who were in trauma who didn't have access to in-person learning. They had access to remote learning for a period of time. And they had the summer slide, which we know there's over 100 years of research about the summer learning loss and how that impacts children, especially children of poverty, of which we're a highly impoverished state, of course. Unfortunately, we know that. But with all that being said, I have to mimic the steps that you looked at. I mean, they're solid steps in the sense that looking at encouraging teachers to look early on as they reach the children, whether it be remotely or whether it be in person, and help them identify those gaps. One of the things we did this summer as part of our state superintendent of schools reentry task force was look at how to help teachers identify those critical prerequisite skills by grade level and focus on vertical teaming exercises they could do to help deepen their knowledge of what, as you move from, for example, kindergarten to first grade, what were those critical prerequisite skills that you need to be successful in first grade? So the content isn't being taught from kindergarten and first grade, but those deficits are able to be more personalized. The interventions are able to be more personalized in response to the deficits that are present for each child. So we have some resources like that are available. Instructional coaches, of course, are critically important. I mentioned that earlier. And we're looking forward to expanding the coaching network for early and elementary learning to focus on literacy as well as numeracy, because we know there's a linkage between early literacy and early numeracy. And whenever you have one that's strong and you know, they can certainly build off the other. And we know there's a body of research out there tying them together as well. And then, of course, those high quality instructional practices. And then last, weaving family engagement in throughout. More importantly than ever, we must engage that home to school connection, especially as we have children who are learning virtually. Young children are not independent learners, and so you have to have that partnership with the family. So those are some of the things that we're seeing in West Virginia with regard to COVID in the instructional process. But I'd really like to go back to the comprehensive approach that you worked on when you were in Mississippi. What were some of the keys you feel were in place that led to the successful implementation for that state?
Okay, well, I'll say this. I believe that we had a focus on how we can support teachers, how we can support students, and how we can support families. I will say this, it all began with passing our Literacy-Based Promotion Act, but in addition to that, we also at the time adopted more rigorous standards, our college and career readiness standards, and also an assessment that aligned to those standards were key in ensuring that our teachers were trained and prepared to implement this act throughout. So within that, our supports for teachers were to build their knowledge of the science of reading, and we adopted a science of reading professional development. and provided that to date, probably about 14 to 15,000 teachers, kindergarten through fourth grade teachers, gen ed, our special education teachers, elementary education administrators, and also our professors in our colleges of education. And we offered it also to our pre-service teachers as they are taking those courses and getting ready to graduate and get into the field. And again, with our coaches, it was transferring that theory to practice. So as you know, you can always go to professional development and you get that binder, or now we get that link to all of the resources. But once you really try to practice those things on your children, your real students, it kind of doesn't go the way that it's planned or how it went in your professional development with other adults. So having coaches side by side with those teachers really helped them to make that connection from the theory that they learned in PD to actually how that looks in practice. And then for students, what we did for students was to make sure that we identified them early with those screeners and diagnostic assessments. Teachers also developed individual reading plans for those students so that they can begin to meet their personal goals for growth. And then also for parents, we developed a parent read at home plan, told parents exactly, if their students have been identified early with a reading deficiency, what we were going to do or what districts can do, what our schools would be doing, and how parents can also help and support. And then also, again, the retention piece. There was a recent study that actually looked at how just having that retention piece in statute or in law, the teachers were making sure that their students were not going to be one of those students that were retained. So it really kind of motivated them to ensure that this doesn't just start in third grade. Our kindergarten, first, second grade, even especially our pre-K teachers are all accountable in that third grade students' outcomes. And so from that, as Governor Bush alluded to earlier, Mississippi now ranks #1 in the nation for our gains for NAEP in fourth grade reading. In 2003, we were ranked 48th in fourth grade reading, and now we are ranked 29th in fourth grade reading. And so we have just had, I believe the passage of the Literacy-Based Promotion Act really accelerated our scores as it relates to that. So what about West Virginia, and what are some of your successes, and what do you see as future opportunities that you all can adopt going forward?
Sure. Well, I made lots of notes when Governor Bush was talking, and one of his quotes was, he said that if you move, you move, and that's really what we are strong proponents of, with looking at this comprehensive approach that we've developed in West Virginia. Relatively new, we're in our 6th year of looking at this whole process for early literacy. And so one of the things that we're really proud of is that we have a longitudinal study that has recently concluded, and it was done with the National Institute for Early Education Research, or NIER, as many of you on in the meeting know about NIER, and they're definitely work with early learning programs birth through age 8. And so their study was done in West Virginia to determine the long-term impact of children who attended universal pre-K versus those children who did not. And it also looked at classroom quality longitudinally. So we have 5 years of data. They're wrapping all of that up. And what we have found is that we have instructional gaps that begin early on. Our pre-K program is high quality. We have, we have pockets of excellence throughout our state and other grade levels in the early years. And so a focus on coaching and a focus on those partnerships to help teachers be able to extract the deficits that are in place, so they can be, so you can have that intervention early on is important. It's so critical. Another thing that we are really interested in continuing to promote is that family partnership, of course, as I mentioned before. All of that takes time, and having strong standards are really important. We've had our standards now for 5 years, almost 5 years. We have our college and career readiness standards in West Virginia, and we've heard the outcry from our educators as well that they need time to understand the standards and to be able to utilize the standards before changing the standards. So that's been something that has been promoted, I know, statewide, as well as staying the course and making sure that we have time to move that needle, because we really are confident that with the local level decision making that's in place, because we know from a state perspective that the counties, the principals, the school, the teachers, they know those children and families far better than I ever will. So while we can provide a system of support and an infrastructure, it's really up to the local level to determine what that looks like. And so we're excited about the possibility with that as well. We're looking forward to gains and making progress. If you think about, though, as we look at that, successes and future opportunities, let's go back to COVID, though, for just a second. I know we have a diverse audience today, so what are some action items, Dr. Burke, that you see for families who might be in the audience today?
First action item, grant yourself some grace. Indeed. We are, as I stated before, just in unprecedented times, and it's frustrating with other economic issues and challenges that families are facing. And as you mentioned, families want the best for their children. They want the best for their children. So especially those who are assisting their children, even our youngest learners, those who are just now learning to read at home, grant yourself some grace. But other action items may include helping your students get organized, giving them an opportunity to have a little to-do list or what the due dates are, but also communicating with the teachers. That is going to be a way in which you really find out what students are expected to do, what are some of their learning targets, asking for a screen of data, asking to see, okay, what is the most recent data? How is my child doing? What are some opportunities for additional help or support? So just ways in which parents can really beef up their communication with teachers. And I know that we're asking a lot of teachers during this time. We're asking a lot from teachers. There are teachers who are teaching classes synchronously with their own children in the room or in the background or in another room who are also online learning. So now more than ever, engagement, being in the know, and if schools are not sending out those weekly memos for parents to know this is what your child has to do, or their teachers aren't sending them out, then request that and just say this is what works best for our family. I think right now, again, we all have to grant some grace, even to our children, especially to our children. But be upfront and honest with teachers about what works best for your family and for your child and for their learning, for the ways in which they learn and the ways in which they continue to be organized. And then lastly, just request resources, to say, if this is where my child is struggling, do you have suggestions for some evidence-based resources that I can use to support my child at home? All right, so I talked about families. So what about our policymakers? What about our business community and those who are viewing this webinar from those particular perspectives?
Sure. So, as far as policymakers, I think they deserve some accolades as well, because they have provided a stable infrastructure of support that those local level teams can make decisions about that are much closer to the children and the families. And so that's critically important. As far as businesses and other entities, there are lots of opportunities to get engaged in your local community. And we have a lot of rural areas. We have a lot of areas that don't have the industry or the economy that other areas in our state do necessarily. That doesn't mean that there aren't partners who are out there and who I'm sure are willing to assist in any way that they can with these early literacy efforts. So any opportunity to promote family literacy would be wonderfully appreciated, I'm sure, at the local level, as well as looking at, I don't want to say just getting books into the hands of children because it's so much more than that, but any opportunity that that a business maker or business person or anyone would be able to have to get books into the hands of children, along with the family support that needs to go along with that. And maybe that's where coaches or family support workers from Head Start or other collaborative partners, libraries, could come into play. Then that partnership is critically important. And then there are opportunities coming up as well. I know that, for example, the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative and the Benjamin Foundation are working to, they're getting ready to release a grant proposal that will allow districts or schools or libraries or partners, businesses, to apply for additional funding to help support the goals of the state's early literacy work. So that's going to be coming out later this month. That's something to look for, definitely. And just continuing to see what those unique needs are in our communities would be a really good strategy. Thank you for that question. I know our time is coming near, so this has been a great opportunity. I've enjoyed talking with you, Dr. Burke. I think there's a question that is for you. There's a question in the chat, I believe, that we have. Oh, we have time. Yeah, so here's the first question.
Okay.
Yeah, for you. So what worked well in your 4-year-old pre-K program in Mississippi for developing a strong foundation for literacy?
Okay, so I'm sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. This is something that I think many may not know, but Mississippi is one of the few southern states, if not the only southern state, that does not have universal pre-K. So we did not have funding going statewide to pre-kindergarten, and so districts could use their Title I funding and those kind of things to create 4-year-old classrooms, but it wasn't necessarily funded by the state. So right after the Literacy-Based Promotion Act was passed, the Early Learning Collaborative Act was passed, which is, and I heard you mention collaboratives before, which is a collaborative that includes a Head Start or a child care center or in a pre-K program that are connected to a school, possibly a PK5 school. And they work together. They actually receive grant funds. So they get together as a collaborative or as a partnership, and they apply for funding to support their efforts to ensure that those students who are leaving those pre-K 4-year-old programs are prepared for kindergarten. And the funds that are allocated, the state funds that are allocated for that, are used for making sure that their teachers are trained in the science of reading. And they use the kindergarten through 3rd grade model that we've used for literacy, for our K-3 Literacy-Based Promotion Act. They also have a partnership with Kellogg, where they've also funded some of the components, and they have literacy coaches for their 4-year-old programs, and they support them on site. There's a curriculum that should be used, or that has to be used as a part of being in the collaborative, that's evidence-based and those types of things. So the model for that really followed the K-3 model. And when I first started in 2013, the Mississippi Department of Ed didn't even have an Office of Early Childhood. So that was one of the first things that our amazing superintendent, that Dr. Wright, decided, hey, you know, if we're going to build this thing out beginning at K, we also have to focus on the preparation gap, which is making sure that we have availability for pre-K seats for our 4-year-olds. And we've also met, I heard you mention NEAR earlier, so we've met, I believe now that we've added coaches, all 10 qualities of NEAR. And I think there's one other question about the coaches. Is it a volunteer position? Is there any way that someone could volunteer to promote early literacy? Well, in Mississippi, our literacy coaches were hired by the State Department. Really is kind of an educator in residence, where they were deployed to the schools based on their reading scores, but volunteers would have to work directly with schools and districts to become volunteers to support literacy in early childhood or K through 3 classrooms. So that was left up to the school and the district, of course, to do all of the managerial things that they needed to do to ensure that the adults were, qualified or in a space where they could actually be there to assist with working with the students.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'll take this one.
Okay.
We've talked about attendance and how that impacts literacy. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the successes we've seen, especially during COVID, to get kids to come to school so they can learn. So that's a question that is definitely poignant at this time. And before the pandemic, our work focused on the fact that there is a body of research that shows that if you're not at school, it's very difficult to engage in the learning process. And there's research out there that shows the statistics of if you don't come to school regularly in kindergarten, you're more than X number of times more likely to be struggling in 3rd grade and in 5th grade and so on. But now that we have the pandemic, it is very tricky because we want children to be safe first and foremost, but we want to be smart about it, much like Governor Bush said. So, in those opportunities where children are, the family chooses and feels that it's in the best interest to be there. I'm a mom myself, and my daughter's in school, and she's a freshman as well, Dr. Burke. So it's something that families must balance, and families must do what is in their best interest, but we have to think about safety, and we have to think about those social and emotional gaps that are happening when children are not in school. There's a lot. It's a big lift. It's a big lift for families, and it's not always a black and white decision in that sense that being clear cut. So with that, I will give this back to Dr. Quartz, I believe, and go from there. So thank you.